Painted in 1656, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Haman occupies a singular and unsettling place within Rembrandt's oeuvre. Conceived as a grand successor to his famed anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp of 1632, the work originally presented a full group portrait of Amsterdam surgeons witnessing a dissection. Only a fragment survives today, the rest lost to fire in 1723. Yet what remains retains extraordinary dramatic force. The scene captures Dr. Jan Dijman and his assistant Gijsbert Kalkoen engaged in the delicate opening of the skull of an executed criminal, Joris Black Jan Fontaine. It is a study not simply in anatomy but in mortality, justice, and the solemn pursuit of knowledge. Rembrandt, then in the later and financially troubled stage of his career, approached the subject with a profound psychological gravity that exceeded conventional civic portraiture. Where earlier anatomy portraits emphasized professional honor and civic virtue, this painting delves into darkness, literally and figuratively. The focus narrows to the body and the two surgeons, transforming the ceremony of medical learning into a quiet meditation on the boundary between life and death. In the Amsterdam of the mid-17th century, anatomical dissections were both scientific demonstrations and moral reckonings, linking public scholarship with the punishment of crime. Rembrandt honors the tradition yet pushes it toward interiority and mystery. Visually, the painting is striking for its dramatic foreshortening of the cadaver, reminiscent of Andrea Mantegna's Lamentation of Christ. The body lies with unnerving immediacy, its forehead split, its skull lifted, its position forcing viewers into the space of the dissection table. Thick shadows envelop the figures while light falls starkly upon exposed flesh, creating both clinical clarity and spiritual solemnity. The assistant's gesture, holding the removed skull cap, contrasts with the concentration of Dr. Dijman, whose hands delicately probe the brain. Rembrandt's brushwork is bold and textured, lending tactile presence to skin, cloth, and bone. The composition is compact, almost sculptural, heightening the intimacy of this moment of scientific inquiry. Thematically, the painting meditates on knowledge acquired through mortality. The criminal's body, once a living presence capable of moral transgression, becomes a vessel for learning, a reminder that human frailty and human understanding are intertwined. The corpse of Joris Fontaine carries narrative weight. A tailor turned delinquent, executed for violent theft. His remains made available to the surgeons as both punishment and public moral lesson. Yet Rembrandt avoids caricature. The cadaver, stripped of identity and history, evokes universal vulnerability. Justice and anatomy converge, but so do compassion and solemn respect. This work reflects broader currents in Rembrandt's late style, an intensification of emotion, a willingness to leave passages unfinished, and a profound inwardness. Here, the painter shows little interest in superficial likenesses or civic display. Instead, he invites contemplation of mortality and the pursuit of truth through direct confrontation with the human body. The tragedy of its partial survival deepens its aura. What remains feels like a relic of an artistic statement that once extended beyond the edges of the surviving canvas. Critics regard the fragment as a haunting testament to Rembrandt's late genius. Though incomplete, it encapsulates his mastery of light, psychological presence, and spiritual depth. It stands at the intersection of art, science, and morality. A work where the pursuit of knowledge is shadowed by human destiny. If the earlier anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp celebrates civic pride, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Diamond confronts existential truth. In its severe beauty and solemn intimacy, it remains one of the most profound meditations on life and death in Western art. Painted in 1656, Jacob blessing the sons of Joseph stands as one of Rembrandt's most profound meditations on faith, lineage, and divine mystery. Commissioned by Amsterdam patrician Willem Schrijver, the work transforms the donor and his family into biblical figures, merging sacred narrative with personal devotion, a common practice among elite patrons, yet here executed with exceptional emotional gravity. The canvas depicts the moment from Genesis 48, when the dying patriarch Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, but crosses his hands to favor the younger, defying tradition and earthly expectation. Within the social and cultural milieu of the Dutch Golden Age, this subject carried resonant themes: the authority of divine will over human hierarchy and the sanctity of family legacy. Rembrandt, deeply attuned to both biblical drama and human frailty, renders the scene not as formal ceremony but as intimate revelation. The patron's decision to appear with his wife Wendela de Graef and children in sacred guise underscores the intersection of religious faith, civic status, and familial pride in 17th century Amsterdam. Visually, the painting demonstrates Rembrandt's late-period mastery of chiaroscuro and velvety impasto, described by scholars as achieving a sculptural surface with a translucent glaze. Figures emerge from shadow in a warm, glowing palette of ochres, siennas, and rich reds, creating an atmosphere at once domestic and sacred. Jacob's crossed arms form the emotional fulcrum of the composition, his aged hands luminous in the divine gesture that breaks convention. Ephraim appears bathed in a soft halo of light, while Manasseh, though blessed less prominently, receives quiet dignity. Asenath, modeled on Wendela de Graef, watches with serenity, her calm presence reinforcing the scene's sanctity and familial tenderness. The emotional core rests on Jacob's solemn compassion and Joseph's restrained confusion. In this moment, human judgment collides with divine purpose. Rembrandt heightens the spiritual paradox. Humility and authority, youth and frailty, tradition and revelation entwine. The figures are not idealized. Their features bear the traces of life's burdens and hopes, emphasizing that sacred history unfolds within flawed humanity. Interpretively, the work becomes a study in predestination and grace. Jacob's deliberate gesture asserts that God's election follows no earthly logic, a theme resonant with Protestant theology. The painting speaks to the fragility of human plans and the quiet force of spiritual truth, suggesting that divine blessing may rest where least expected. Its close domestic sensibility also reflects Rembrandt's personal affinity for portraying biblical events as lived experience, not distant legend. Art historians regard this canvas as a culmination of Rembrandt's spiritual realism. Its tactile surfaces, introspective light, and profound psychological depth exemplify his ability to fuse portraiture, scripture, and meditation. Even as it honors its patrons, the work transcends private commemoration to reveal a universal drama of mortality, faith, and generational destiny. In its solemn hush and radiant humanity, it remains one of Rembrandt's most moving testaments to divine mystery made flesh. Painted in 1660, Ahasuerus and Haman at the Feast of Esther marks one of the culminating moments of Rembrandt van Rijn's late career, distinguished for its psychological depth and moral gravity. Unlike many of his earlier narrative works, this painting distills the biblical drama into an intimate triangle of emotion and fate. The scene, drawn from chapters 5 to 7 of the Book of Esther, portrays the fateful banquet where Queen Esther reveals Haman's treachery to King Ahasuerus. With only 3 figures, Rembrandt achieves an extraordinary concentration of dramatic tension: Esther's cautious humility, the king's rising fury, and Haman's shadowed despair. The work's historical context is unusually well documented. Rembrandt painted it in Amsterdam, likely inspired by Hester, a 1659 stage play by Johannes Servauters, written in response to the Eastern European pogroms. The play, performed at the Schouwburger van Kampen and dedicated to Leonor Heidekoper, carried a clear moral message about divine justice and human cruelty. Commissioned perhaps by a member of the Heidekoper family, the painting also served as a means to support Rembrandt during a period of financial strain. Sold in 1660 to Jan J. Hinlopen, the work quickly gained recognition in Amsterdam's artistic circles and was even commemorated in a poem by Jan Vos, who praised its penetrating portrayal of vengeance and remorse. In compositional and stylistic terms, Ahasuerus and Haman at the Feast of Esther exemplifies the mature Rembrandt's mastery of chiaroscuro and emotional compression. The banquet itself is barely suggested. The table and vessels dissolve into dim tones, allowing the interplay of light and shadow to dominate. Esther glows with moral radiance, her shimmering robe catching the light like the embodiment of purity and faith. The king, his face half-lit, leans forward in restrained wrath. Haman, meanwhile, sinks into darkness, his figure nearly consumed by shadow, a visual metaphor for guilt and doom. Through these contrasts, Rembrandt stages not merely a royal drama, but the eternal conflict between justice and deceit, light and darkness. The narrative focus lies not on spectacle, but on conscience. The moment captured is one of revelation and judgment. Esther's courage confronts tyranny, and divine providence manifests through quiet human resolve. Her lowered hands, the king's pursed lips, and Haman's heavy posture form a silent triad of emotional communication, what one critic has called restrained but eloquent gestures. The psychological realism here transcends illustration. Each character is caught at the precise threshold between thought and action, between concealment and confession. Symbolically, Rembrandt's treatment resonates deeply with the moral sensibilities of his time. The story of Esther, a woman who risks her life to save her people, embodied themes of faith, courage, and divine intervention that were central to both Jewish and Protestant traditions in 17th century Europe. Moreover, the composition's unity between Esther and the king, contrasted with Haman's isolation, visually expresses the triumph of righteousness over corruption. This ethical clarity, conveyed through nuanced gesture and light, elevates the painting from biblical narrative to timeless parable. The painting's journey mirrors its enduring significance. From Hinlopen's private collection, it passed through the Gielvink family, later entering Catherine the Great's holdings in St. Petersburg via the art dealer Gotskowski, eventually transferred to the Museum Rumyantsev in Moscow, and then to the Pushkin Museum in 1924. It remains one of the masterpieces of Rembrandt's late period. Critics often regard it as among the finest works of his final decade. A meditation on moral destiny rendered with unparalleled spiritual and psychological insight. In its restrained grandeur, Ahasuerus and Haman at the Feast of Esther stands as one of the most haunting achievements of Western art. Painted in 1660, The Denial of Peter stands among the most psychologically charged and spiritually introspective works of Rembrandt van Rijn's late period. Now housed in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the painting captures the pivotal gospel moment when Peter, one of Christ's most devoted apostles, denies his master 3 times before dawn. In the dimly lit courtyard, Rembrandt transforms this scene from a simple biblical episode into a profound meditation on fear, guilt, and human frailty, themes that preoccupied him during the final decade of his life. The composition unfolds in a deeply theatrical yet intimate arrangement. Peter, robed in white and seated near the firelight, raises his hands in denial as a servant woman points him out. 2 soldiers, their armor glinting faintly in the gloom, observe with suspicion. In the shadowed background, Christ is seen being led away, his face turned gently toward Peter, a silent, sorrowful acknowledgement of the betrayal. This fleeting exchange of glances bridges 2 emotional worlds: the physical drama of accusation and the spiritual torment of conscience. Through Chiaroscuro, Rembrandt separates these spaces with masterly precision. The flickering fire illuminates Peter's troubled face, while the darkness enveloping Christ's figure suggests divine forbearance and human shame intertwined. Rembrandt's choice of subject and its treatment reflect his deeply personal engagement with the biblical narrative. By 1660, the artist had endured financial ruin, the deaths of his loved ones, and a long struggle with solitude. These experiences gave his late works a grave inwardness that transcends narrative illustration. The denial of Peter is not merely a depiction of sin, but a revelation of remorse. Peter's anguished gesture and downcast eyes convey a crisis of faith that mirrors the universal human struggle between conviction and weakness. In this sense, the painting anticipates the moral introspection of later European art, where emotion replaces dogma as the core of spiritual experience. While Rembrandt never traveled to Italy, his engagement with European pictorial traditions was profound and discerning. Scholars have traced the compositional lineage of this work to Flemish engravings after Gerard Segers, particularly those by Schelte Abolswert and Giovanni Antonio de Paoli. Yet, as in all of Rembrandt's reinterpretations, the foreign models are absorbed into his own idiom, one defined by psychological realism rather than theatrical display. Where Segers had emphasized external drama, Rembrandt internalized the scene, focusing on the flickering light of conscience instead of the glare of accusation. His manipulation of impasto and warm, broken brushwork lends the figures both substance and fragility, as if their forms are trembling beneath the weight of moral truth. The theological dimension of the denial of Peter is equally profound. The gospel story recounts Peter's failure, but also his later repentance and restoration, a cycle of sin, forgiveness, and grace central to Christian thought. Rembrandt's depiction stops at the moment of denial, heightening the pathos of separation but also foreshadowing redemption. The viewer, placed in the servant's position, becomes witness not only to Peter's fall, but to the silent compassion of Christ, whose backward glance invites empathy rather than judgment. The painting thus transforms a narrative of betrayal into a meditation on divine mercy and human redemption. The work's provenance traces an extraordinary journey across Europe's cultural history. After circulating among collectors in the Netherlands and France, it was acquired in 1781 by Catherine the Great of Russia, joining the vast holdings of the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. In the early 20th century, during the Soviet Union's secret art sales, the painting was purchased by the Rijksmuseum in 1933, where it remains one of the crowning masterpieces of Rembrandt's late period. Today, the denial of Peter endures not only as a testament to the artist's mastery of light and emotion, but as one of the most penetrating visual meditations on the fragility and redemption of the human soul. Painted in 1660, Titus as a monk, also known as Rembrandt's son Titus in a monk's habit, is one of the most poignant and introspective portraits of Rembrandt's late career. Now housed in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the work depicts the artist's only surviving son, Titus van Rijn, dressed in the humble brown robes of a Franciscan monk. At once serene and sorrowful, the painting captures not only the spiritual gravitas of its religious guise, but also the deep emotional bond between father and son, a relationship marked by tenderness, loss, and mutual endurance through hardship. The composition is stripped of all narrative embellishment. Titus is shown against a dark, undefined background, his youthful face illuminated by a soft, introspective light that seems to emanate from within rather than from any external source. His head, tilted slightly downward, suggests a state of quiet meditation. The muted palette, ochres, browns, and subdued golds, enhances the contemplative mood, evoking the austerity of monastic life while simultaneously revealing the fragility of human youth. Through these tonal harmonies, Rembrandt transforms the image of his son into an embodiment of spiritual introspection, a living metaphor for resignation and inner peace amid worldly suffering. At the time of this painting, Rembrandt's life was shadowed by financial ruin, the deaths of his companions, and his own advancing age. Titus, who had become a stabilizing force in his father's turbulent existence, was managing the art business that allowed Rembrandt to continue painting despite bankruptcy. Thus, the depiction of Titus in monk's robes is not merely devotional, it reflects a profound personal allegory. The habit becomes symbolic of the renunciation both father and son were forced to endure, not as members of a religious order, but as souls stripped of worldly possessions, seeking consolation in faith, art, and one another. The stylistic qualities of Titus as a monk exemplify Rembrandt's mature handling of paint, where surface texture and emotion merge seamlessly. His brushwork is loose, almost vaporous in parts, allowing light to play delicately across Titus's features while dissolving into shadow at the edges. The use of chiaroscuro here transcends technique. It functions as a language of inner revelation. The painting's luminosity emanates from the flesh itself, suggesting the sanctity of human vulnerability. Unlike the polished portraits of his contemporaries, Rembrandt's realism is moral rather than decorative, grounded in empathy rather than idealization. Thematically, the work resonates with Rembrandt's enduring fascination with spiritual humility and the redemptive power of suffering. In portraying his son as a monk, he channels the Franciscan ideal of poverty and compassion, aligning it with his own humanist vision of divinity manifest in the ordinary. The painting's quiet dignity echoes the broader theological shift of the Dutch Golden Age, from external piety toward interior faith. Titus's downcast eyes and gentle expression invite contemplation, positioning the viewer not as an observer but as a participant in his silent prayer. Beyond its spiritual dimension, the portrait holds a deeply personal significance in the Rembrandt canon. Titus would die only 2 years later, in 1662, at the age of 26. A loss that devastated the aging artist. Seen in retrospect, Titus as a monk becomes a premonitory elegy, a father's farewell rendered in oil and light. Its emotional candor distinguishes it among Rembrandt's final works, embodying the fusion of earthly love and spiritual transcendence that defines his late style. Today, Titus as a monk endures as one of the Rijksmuseum's most intimate treasures, a meditation on mortality, devotion, and the quiet nobility of the human soul. Through this painting, Rembrandt transforms personal grief into universal compassion, reaffirming his mastery not only as a painter of faces but as a chronicler of the deepest movements of the heart. In the Conspiracy of Civilis, Rembrandt captures one of the most heroic and mythical moments in Batavian history. Inspired by the histories of Tacitus, the painting depicts the one-eyed chieftain Claudius Civilis and his warriors swearing an oath of rebellion against the Roman Empire. It stands as Rembrandt's final secular history painting and one of his boldest experiments in light, composition, and collective emotion. Set in a dimly lit hall, the scene glows with a haunting inward light emanating from the center of the composition. Civilis, his face rough and scarred, extends his hand over a sword as his comrades do the same in a sacred act of allegiance. Rembrandt's mastery of chiaroscuro lends the scene its emotional tension. The figures emerge from shadow, their gestures illuminated like revelations of faith and defiance. Around them, the darkness deepens, creating an atmosphere of solemn destiny. Unlike the polished grandeur of his contemporaries such as Govert Flinck or Jacob Jordaens, Rembrandt chose a deeply personal, psychological approach. Civilis is not an idealized hero, but a weathered, vulnerable man marked by age and sacrifice. Through this humanity, Rembrandt transforms a patriotic legend into a meditation on courage and conviction, where the faint light of belief endures amid uncertainty and betrayal. Originally commissioned for the newly built Amsterdam Town Hall, the painting was removed soon after installation, its raw and unconventional style deemed inappropriate for a civic monument. Rembrandt, unpaid and facing financial distress, cut the monumental 5-meter canvas down to a quarter of its original size to sell it. Yet, even in its reduced form, the painting retains its monumental spirit and inner intensity, revealing the uncompromising freedom of Rembrandt's late style, stark, tragic, and profoundly human. After centuries of changing hands, the Conspiracy of Civilis eventually found a permanent home in the National Museum in Stockholm. Though only a fragment survives, it remains one of the most powerful examples of Rembrandt's genius. A painting that illuminates in flickering gold and shadow the timeless struggle between human frailty and moral strength.